welcome to The Mill. We are so excited to be joined by a very, very special guest, someone I've really enjoyed getting to know over the last year, James McKim. James is a founder and managing partner of Organizational Ignition, a management consulting firm. He is a sought-after consultant, facilitator, speaker, and author of the best-selling book, The Diversity Factor: Igniting Superior Organizational Performance. In addition to being named one of New Hampshire's top 200 business leaders, Mr. McKim has been recognized by industry watchers such as ATD, Brandon Hall, Bersin Associates, Axelos, and PMI. I'm hoping I pronounced all of those correctly. Comment below if I didn't.
Yep.
For his dedication to creating win-win situations between organizations and their employees. He's known internationally for his current focus on organizational and individual performance through diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. His pronouns are he, him. James, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rachel. It's great to be here.
Lovely, lovely. Well, we've got a lot of questions, and I can't wait to dive in. It's been really exciting getting to see you present. I think I even got to see the same presentation twice, which, to be honest with you, was ideal. Not only because I knew the answers to some of your questions in the second time around, and I felt like I had a secret that no one else knew, but because the information that you talk about and your approach to sharing your thoughts on organizational performance and the role that DEI plays in organizations is so intuitive and powerful that you almost miss some of it the first time around. So I couldn't wait to get you on here to really spend some time diving into some deeper questions on this topic.
Well, that's what a lot of people say, and I encourage people when they hear what I have to say a couple of times to just think about what you remember from the last time you heard me, and always look at what you can pick up. Because even when I talk about things, when I watch little video clips that I use, I actually pick up little things that I didn't even realize the last time I picked it up. So that growth mindset is, I think, so important for us to have.
Absolutely. So let's start first with some history. I'd love if you could provide an overview of your journey. It's been a really interesting one. You've had various roles and worn lots of hats, such as consultant, change manager, project manager, speaker, trainer. Talk to me about how these roles have contributed to really shaping you being such a versatile human being and driving organizational change and improvements.
Well, my parents always said my parents were educators. So start with that as a background. And my parents always believed that it's of extreme value to be as versatile as possible, to know as much about as many different things as possible. So, of course, when education comes to mind and thinking about knowing a lot about a lot of things, liberal arts education comes to mind. So I had one of those liberal arts educations from what some of us would argue is the best academic institution on the planet, Dartmouth College. So I was there and got degrees in computer science and philosophy. And I like to say I can explain what a bit and a byte is, and I can theorize to their actual existence. So with that as a backdrop, I started my career as a programmer, and from there really dove into the world of technology. Spent most of my career there, and I still leverage that technology knowledge from being a programmer to being a database administrator to being a developer of training around databases and around systems. I still use that today. But as I went through my career, the philosophical side of me kind of took hold. And so while I was doing things like starting up companies and joining the Software Association of New Hampshire and eventually leading that as chair, I was also in the Episcopal Church starting to deal with issues around discrimination and racism. And this was kind of not by design, because even though I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, to parents who were civil rights activists, I had made a conscious decision to not get involved in that stuff. I just wanted to live my life. And it just so happened that I was asked to attend a meeting of the Episcopal Diocese of New Hampshire's Anti-Racism Committee by my rector at the church I attend, St. Matthew's in Goffstown. And so I reluctantly went. And about a week after that meeting, and I was there just going to listen, right? I wasn't intending to get involved. I was just listening. A week after that, the Bishop of New Hampshire called me up and asked me, would you be willing to take over the chair of the Anti-Racism Commission for the Diocese of New Hampshire?
Oh.
So I said, well, not something I really wanted to do. But when your bishop asks you to do something, it's hard to say no.
Yeah.
So I agreed with one caveat. I said, I'll do it if we can change the name to the Diversity Committee, because I didn't want to really be associated with something that was negative, anti-racism. That's a negative. He agreed, and so that started me on this journey to dealing with issues of racism and racial reconciliation, and really diversity overall. So I'm on these two parallel paths of still working in the technology space, forming companies, being a consultant. I was a consultant for 10 years before I went to Hewlett Packard, where I took on a role in the learning and development in HR space. So that shift from technology to HR came to being there. So doing that path and doing the Episcopal Church path, and they kind of converged when I left HP back in 2018. And they converged in that I started seeing this opportunity to leverage so many of the skills that I had honed over my years as having my own companies, being consultants with companies, to bring together people, process, and technology. And the people part is where the racial reconciliation piece kind of filtered in. And particularly as the murders of George Floyd in 2020 and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor happened, there became this real focus in business and in society in general around, so how do we address this issue, right? And so the switch flipped in my brain at that point that said, you know what? This is not just good from a social justice perspective that we focus on this. There's an organizational performance need here and perspective. And that's when I really launched into where I am today, is looking at organizational performance through diversity, equity, and inclusion. So all these different roles that I've had, from programmer all the way through to project manager for software development and systems efforts, to consultant, to be on boards, to founding companies, to being in the Episcopal Church space, where I'm able to help craft the church's policy on racial reconciliation. All of that's what's really contributed my expertise in driving organizational improvements and performance. Long-winded answer, but hopefully that answers that.
No, it does. It does. And I think what's great about that, James, is it was fueled by, at first, reluctance to say, I don't, it's okay. I don't want to get involved. Like I support what you're doing, but I don't want to, I just want to live my life. To then have a door open to say, hey, we'd really love you to come in, and then go into something like that and not only see the potential of what that group could have done for your church in that one isolated situation, but then the impact that you as an individual could have on the greater good of that organization and the institution of the church. And then that's really catapulted you into what you're doing today, and shifting it into trying to go after companies who are, some big corporate America businesses are probably the first to raise their hand, or maybe they don't, of saying, yeah, we are not, DEI is not a focus. We know it should be. We believe in it, but we don't really know what to do. And in my time being with you, it feels
Right.
that the work you do provides calls to action and education. And I don't
Hmm.
think that you can have one without the other.
No, no, you can't really, and because the call to action has to be such that people feel that they can take up that call to action. And feeling like they can take up that call to action means they need to be educated. They need to have the information and the know-how to actually do that.
Right. Right. And we see it time and time again. I mean, particularly in marketing, there's a lack of education of what DEI means. There's a lot of instances in my career. Thankfully, now I'm very proud of all of our clients and the work that we do. But in my career, I've experienced where clients feel that by putting a person of color or a same-sex couple on their website, an image of that is DEI. And it is certainly a step in the right direction. But I think for us, what we really try to instill is that, and I live this way personally, it's one thing to talk the talk. You really need to walk the walk. What else can we do? Have you talked to your
Mhm.
employees? Have you assessed your staff? Is there diversity in your staff? And James, one thing it has stuck with me since the very first time I saw your presentation was I think it's called the diversity wheel that you shared. And I think when most people think diversity, they think racial diversity or gender diversity. But I'd love for you to kind of
Right,
dive
right.
into all the different aspects because for me, that was very eye-opening to really, I knew that there are all these different layers and differentiators that separate us and also bring us together. But that was one of the most incredible things I had taken away from your presentation is really like let's take a look at the full spectrum of diversity.
Right. So this is based on work from Marilyn Loden, who at Johns Hopkins Institute in 1991 came up with a
As a
way of
Johns Hopkins
describing
grad, by the way,
diversity.
not to interrupt you, as a Johns Hopkins grad, I'm very
Yeah.
proud. Please continue.
There you go. All right, there you go. So she came up with a way of describing diversity as really personality characteristics,
Mm,
and she used the term characteristics.
mm,
And she created this framework for describing diversity that is a wheel. And at the very hub of the wheel is personality. And around that wheel are different personality characteristics in bands. So the first band, the closest band to the inner circle of personality is called, she called them primary characteristics. And these primary characteristics are characteristics of our personality that really go to the core of who we are, like our race, our ethnicity, our age, our gender, our physical ability. And so the next layer out, she called secondary characteristics, which are more about how we are perceived by and interact with everybody else. So things like where are we physically located, geographically located? Well, I'm in New Hampshire. I'm in New Hampshire. Right? That's part of my personality, right? Um, am I married or single? What's my religion? What are my personal habits? What's my appearance like? So these are characteristics of my personality that people recognize as me. Lee Gardensworth and Chris Rao in 2007 updated the model, and they added a layer that they called organizational characteristics. And they said those organizational characteristics are how we are perceived and how we interact in an organization. So, are we a senior person or a junior person in that organization? Are we a manager or an individual contributor in that organization? Are we part of a union? What function do we perform in that organization? Are we finance? Are we marketing? Are we sales? Are we R&D? So all of these characteristics make up who we are. And Loden said that diversity is really about these personality characteristics. And having as many of these personality characteristics as possible is what leads to having as many perspectives in the organization as possible. And it's those perspectives, having those diverse perspectives, that really lead to superior organizational performance.
yeah. Thank you
So
for
that's the wheel.
yeah, it was one of my favorite pieces, and I loved a lot about your presentations that I've sat through, but that was one of the most thought provoking for me because I think whenever people talk about diversity, it instantly goes to race or gender, um, which is
Right.
understandable, right? We're kind
And
of
that's not
things
to
that
say that
way.
we don't talk about race or gender, but
Yeah,
we want to be specific when we do that. So we use the adjective racial diversity or gender diversity. So we
right.
know what we're really talking about.
Yep, exactly. So if you are watching this, please Google that or reach out to James McKim and ask for some information about it. It was just it was really really important for me to read through that. So you've been involved in economic workforce development in board positions, government committees. How have you experienced, or can you share an example of when you saw an impact to the broader economic and social goals of that organization?
One of the things that I'm really proud of is something that in the Manchester NAACP we've developed. I developed along with John Hamilton when he was at the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. We developed this program called Community Driven Economic Empowerment, or CDEE. And the mission there is to help entrepreneurs of color to find the resources, be they technical assistance or financial assistance and capital, that they need to start or grow their business. And I would not have been able to really be engaged in this effort if I hadn't already had my experiences of working for a company and creating a couple of companies on my own. Um, so uh, just recently, we gave grants of $52,000 to 26 entrepreneurs in the greater Manchester area. And those businesses, some of them were just starting up, some of them are now thriving and more efficient because in some cases, what that funding and that assistance, and we work with the small business development centers on this and the centers for women in enterprise on this as well. They've been able to get organized so that they're doing their accounting using a real accounting system instead of, in some cases, keeping receipts in a shoebox. Right. So that's the kind of economic development and workforce development that has I think had a real impact in Manchester, and we're looking at how we can take that model across the rest of the state.
Yeah. That was my next question is, seems like that's something we could step and repeat and make a big impact outside of even just the state.
Right, right, and it's coupled together pieces from what programs exist in other states, but we tailored it for Manchester, New Hampshire. So working with the New Hampshire Small Business Development Center and with
Right.
the Center for Women in Enterprise here in New Hampshire makes it New Hampshire centric so that we're bringing New Hampshire resources to bear and not just relying on resources from some other state.
Right. Yeah. That's a great example. And I want to talk a bit about your speaking, uh, your speaker series. You do quite a bit of it. You are a very good and effective communicator. I also know and have experienced and been in rooms where you are talking to different audiences, whether it's employees, boards of
Mm-hmm.
directors, committees. The diversity of those audiences is also diverse depending on who you're talking to. So talk us through how you prepare for your presentations and really what's your ultimate takeaway across any presentation that you give.
So this is going to be similar to your experience in marketing, which I got from my learning and development days and building courseware. You start with who's the audience? Who is the audience? What are their needs? What are they trying to accomplish? And what is their knowledge level about the subject matter? Right? Because what you want to say needs to support what they're trying to achieve. So as you've seen, what I start off every workshop with or conversation with, and I try to do this beforehand to get a sense of who the audience is also. But I ask, so what questions do you have about this topic? What would be most interesting to you and valuable to you for me to say? Because I've written a book about this stuff. I could talk for hours and hours and hours, but we only have a limited amount of time together, right? So what can I say to you that's going to make this time we have together most valuable to you, to you to feel like it's been worth your time? So I start with that, and then based on that answer, I will put together uh, slides, videos, whatever that will explain the concepts in a way that makes sense to you. And we also talk about we take in information differently. We have each have a preference for how we best take in information, right? So we need to look at, is there a visual presentation of the information? Is there an auditory presentation of the information? Is there a textual presentation of the information? And we try to hit all three of those. And also, I'm being a philosophy student. I love Aristotle. And Aristotle says that the best arguments and descriptions and arguments in his language is not the arguing going back and forth about something. It's a dialogue, really. The best arguments, the best dialogues contain ethos, pathos, and logos, ethics, emotions, and logic. So whatever I put together, I try to make sure that there are those three components also within, because we're trying to reach people where they are at the moment and in ways that will resonate with them. So that's kind of how I approach any of my conversations and workshops and presentations. And when I work with companies, I'll ask, what are your organizational goals overall? And they'll go, we don't have any DEI goals. I said, no, I didn't ask about your DEI goals. I asked about your organizational goals overall.
Right.
Because DEI is a means to an end. It's not an end unto itself.
Right.
Okay? So
Yep.
it's that context that I also try to bring to these kind of conversations and presentations.
Yeah, I also think there's a misconception that DEI is like a project that you add to your status sheet. And in the beginning, it has to be a little bit because it needs to be made a focus if it hasn't been a focus before. But I think the goal and what I want companies watching this to understand is that eventually, hopefully in the shorter term, it becomes a part of your strategic plan versus something else that we want to just check a box. It becomes a part of our ethos, a part of our culture.
Right, and it does need to become part of the operations plan in a way that supports the strategic plan goals. And sometimes, as you said, in the early stages, when you're trying to first put a focus on it, you do have to have a separate plan. And this is one of the questions I ask with organizations all the time is, where are you in your strategic planning process? If you've got a strategic plan, then we're going to need to create a separate DEI plan that's going to integrate with that. But if you're at the strategic planning process, then, well, let's make sure that we embed DEI in that strategic plan to get you through the maturity levels that are around DEI. And as you said, you start with, and we talk about using the Deloitte and the PwC models of maturity. We talked about starting off in the first level where you're only thinking about compliance. So we need to have EEOC compliance. That's in the United States. We have EEOC rules and regulations, right? But then you move to the point where you recognize the business value or the organizational performance value. We talk about missional value for nonprofits, right? You recognize that missional value of DEI. And you start then to make sure that it's not just about diversity. It's also about engaging that diversity. And you build into your systems engagement of that diversity. And that's what really gets you up the maturity model, maturity scale, and gets you the organizational performance.
One of the things I think about a lot, unfortunately, is June is Pride Month. And even now, in the world that we live in today, there are companies who use that for financial gain to start to push a lot of content, messaging, sales, new product services, etc., during the month of
Products.
June.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And I'm split on this, right? Because on the one hand, I'm like, well, I'm glad you're saying something. I'm glad you're doing something. On the other hand, I'm like, where are you the other 11 months of the year? And if this is going to be a focus for your
Yes.
organization,
Yeah.
then it needs to be a focus always. It needs to be systemic change within your organization, not just, ooh, it's trendy. Let's jump on it. What else are you doing? And it doesn't mean you need to be broadcasting all that you're doing, or if you want to, fantastic, because I think it continues to push the narrative of this thing is not right. Here's how we're working to make it better, more inclusive, more equitable for everyone involved.
Right. And what I add on to that is, I talk about organizational performance, and one of the things I start off with is, well, what does organizational performance mean?
Mm,
Right? Most people think of organizational performance as financial
right,
profit, but I love the Universalia definition of organizational performance, which is the balance of effectiveness, efficiency, relevance, and financial viability.
mm-hmm,
So when you're looking at those four components, when we're thinking about things like who's the audience and is it the audience flavor of the month, we're really thinking about the concept of relevance to the organization, and that flows into financial viability long term.
right,
So if you're only thinking about Pride Month and selling Pride Month and selling those products and services 1 month, great, but you're missing out on the revenue that you could generate for the rest of the year by having a
right,
constant focus on the LGBTQ audience, right? And
absolutely.
having a focus on the rest of the year on all of those personality characteristics,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah,
the challenge for so many organizations, of course, is you probably heard me use this term, the gazintas and the gazaudos, when we think of efficiency, right? Resources, organizations have limited resources. So you have to figure out where you're going to spend those resources that you have to get the most bang for your buck, the gazintas resources versus the gazaudos. So there is this challenge of, oh, do we have the resources to market and sell to one audience 12 months out of the year? Right? There is that kind of question. But there's an evaluation that I think can go on from a strategic perspective that says, well, isn't it better for us to have a large audience base than to be so targeted and have to switch foci every month of the year to try to focus on, well, this year it's Pride Month, and this year it's Women's Month, and this year that's a waste of resources as well, and it hurts
right.
your reputation. So this
But I
big
think
picture
there's,
thinking is so important to help prioritize what you're going to apply your limited resources toward.
I could not agree with that more, James. And I also think that the companies, like if it's a large retailer, for example, who I won't name, um, if it's costly to produce product to sell, there are other ways that you can show support for a specific community in many different aspects,
Right.
right? And so I think that for me, it is 100% yes, you're right. We have to make sure that is this financially viable for us as an organization, or is this going to financially hurt us? Because we don't want to be doing things that financially hurt us. However, that should not prohibit us from still doing good, being inclusive, equitable, diverse, and speaking out. So for me, it really is. It is a full, comprehensive picture. It's not just focusing on the one thing, the one image on the site, the 1 month that you want to sell these specific types of products. You really have to consider things on a much larger scale, and beyond the financial
Right.
benefits of organizational, um, inclusion and performance is employee retention. If you are a company that is doing
Right.
good more than you're not, you're likely going to attract more people, more diverse audiences that want to come work for you. You're going to retain those people much longer because they'll feel happy and proud. And then they'll be happier to work. They're going to work harder, which then goes back into profitability. So, I don't know.
Right.
I'm
Right.
hopeful that we can continue to move in that path and more companies will start to recognize, wow, this is beneficial it ticks all those boxes that I need to be focusing on as an organization.
Yeah, yeah. And this is where I talked about the four components of organization performance, one being relevance. It's not just relevance to your customers, it's
Hmm.
relevance to all of your stakeholders. And
Right.
employees are a stakeholder, your
Right.
vendors are stakeholders, right? So, how are you being relevant to all of those stakeholders, which for the employees, as you said, gets into career development and having um, mentorship opportunities, and those things will not only attract people to the organization as employees, but make them want to stay with the
Right.
organization.
And speaking of building and leading teams, which is fundamental to leadership, what would you consider essential for high performing teams to have qualities, characteristics, personalities? And then how do you identify if something seems to be lacking? How do we make change to get us, firing on all the right engines?
Yeah. So when we're talking about high performing teams, I love to use the model that PricewaterhouseCoopers has come up with when they talk about what is a high performing team. And they use the characteristics of trust, clarity, accountability, meaning and impact, and having a winning attitude. And so team members have to believe and contribute and feel safe to take risks in doing their work. That's the trust piece. Trust in team members, trust in leadership. There needs to be clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities, what the work is, and what structures are in place to help support getting that work done. What are the plans that are in place? What are the goals in place that we're trying to achieve? Clarity around all of that is important. People need to be held accountable for getting things done on time and meeting high standards, because we want the products or services that we're producing to be of high quality. And then there is this notion of meaning and impact. The work that is done needs to be meaningful and impactful. Otherwise, why are we at this job doing this work if it's not meaningful to us, if it's not meaningful to the world, if it's not going to have an impact?
Right.
And then this notion of a winning attitude is last. If a team doesn't have a winning attitude, if they don't feel like they can accomplish what they're going to accomplish, morale is going to be in the tank. They're not going to want to work. So those are the characteristics. And how do you know that you don't have one or more of these? Well, hopefully you've got a performance management system that uses these concepts as part of the way you're measuring the success of the team or the organization.
Hmm.
If there's not trust, then hopefully you have an employee, a voice of the workforce kind of survey that you do every year that tells you whether your employees trust you as a manager or trust the leadership of the organization. I've seen so many organizations, and I've lived in them, where the direct supervisor gets rave reviews, but the senior leadership, not so much.
Mm.
Right? So using those kinds of whether it's an annual survey or a pulse survey or whatever, is one way to gauge whether you've got the accountability right, whether you've got the clarity right, whether you've got the team winning attitude right.
Mm.
I'd also say that managers need to know how to lead in a very supportive coaching way. We've morphed from a management model that was command and control to a more collaborative management model now. And we see that those more collaborative models work better. And you're going to have some outliers like Steve Jobs, who was known to not be a collaborative leader, right?
Mm.
But if you really want to retain employees, keep them happy, keep them productive, keep them being the innovators, the drivers of change, rather than having to have one person in the head who has to have all the ideas. You want a collaborative model,
Right.
which means managers need to understand how to be coaches
Hmm.
to gather information and support the people who are reporting to them or they're supporting, rather
Yeah.
than barking orders at people.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's really helpful. I love that idea of that model. I'm definitely going to look that up when we get off of this podcast. So, James, just to wrap up, any finishing thoughts? What are some things that you're seeing, trends? What are you forecasting? Coming up within the next year or two for the world, for businesses, and what are some things you're really hoping to see come to fruition?
Well, so this is kind of leading into the project one of the projects I'm now working on. Um, we now are at a point where we again have this awareness that we need to really live into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's some headwinds there, not the least of which is the recent Supreme Court decision on affirmative action that happened a couple of months ago. So I'm starting to see some pushback on DEI efforts and some people saying, well, DEI is failing. DEI efforts don't work. So I'm actually working on helping organizations understand that, well, the way it's not that DEI efforts don't work, it's the way you were doing them was not proper.
Right.
And with so many different organizations, when they try to make organizational change, they look at training alone as being the solution.
Mm.
And that's the way DEI has been approached by many people. We just need to train our people on DEI, and we'll be that'll help us. That'll get us to where we want to go. And that's absolutely not the case. In the learning and development space, we know that you take a course, and 2 weeks later, you will have forgotten 80% of what you learned in that course.
Yeah.
So the organization needs to be set up so that there's an expectation that you're going to use what you learned in that course. And you're going to be graded, if you want to use that word. There's a performance management system in place that checks and makes sure that you're going to use that new information. It's behavioral change that we're looking for as an organization that makes sure that that information we got in that training gets used. So that I'm starting to see a little bit of that now coming through. Consultants are starting to realize that it's not just the training piece. It's got to go beyond that to the engagement piece and the
Right.
performance management piece.
Yeah. Education with
Something else I'm really right. Another area I'm really looking at is technology in general as it's evolving. And I know there's a big brouhaha now about artificial intelligence and bias in AI.
Yep.
It's bigger than that, though. It's a bias in technology overall, and we don't even realize that technology has been biased all this time, and it will continue to be biased. And I'm talking not just AI, not just software, but hardware is biased, and we don't even realize it. We have right-handed mice that leave out or don't work so well for left-handed people. We have oxygen meters that don't work properly for people who are melanin enhanced. So we've got all these hardware technologies that are biased, and we're putting more. We have something, we as humans have something called automation bias. We have a bias to automating anything we can automate because it makes it easier for us, right? Well, that means we're relying on technology more and more and more, which is biased because the people who are writing technology are biased.
Right.
So that's a big campaign I have is my Eliminate Bias in Tech campaign to try to highlight these biases in technology and to teach technologists how to not let bias creep in.
Yeah. And thank you for jogging my memory. That was my other favorite part about your presentation was that you brought in the computer mouse. And I think you even started the presentation with that and was like, who can tell me what's wrong with this? And the room was kind of baffled. Right. They were kind of like, it's not connected to the computer. Like, yes. And
yeah.
it assumes that you have fingers. It assumes that you have hands. It assumes you're right-handed. It assumes you own a computer. There's so many things, and I'm glad that you were making that a focus because, again, I like to think I am an optimist by choice. I like to think that some people don't even understand their own bias. It's just so ingrained in them.
Right.
And so the effort really has to be in breaking down barriers, providing education, creating awareness just in general awareness of, hey, this exists. Let's talk about it. And then taking it to that step after the education of the call to action. And now here's what we do about it. Here's how we can create a better way, a better opportunity,
Right.
things that are more inclusive for all.
Right. And part of the reason why, even after we are aware of the challenge, part of the reason why we don't take action is because we don't know how.
Right.
We're not taught how. We're not
Right.
given the space to take action. And
Mm.
that's where the organization can come in and say, we're going to create this space to make the change. We're expecting you all as individual contributors in our organization and managers to make this change.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, James, that was great. There's so much more that we can and should talk about. But for the sake of our viewers today, we won't occupy more of your time, but I cannot thank you enough for coming on and spending some time with us today. If anyone who is watching is interested in learning more about Mr. James McKim and all of his incredible accomplishments and work, please connect with him. He will be tagged on LinkedIn. Check him out, reach out to him. He's always happy to have a conversation. James, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been great, as always, talking with you.
Good, good. All right, everyone. Thanks again for tuning into The Mill. We'll see you next time.